I think being in total control of your own lifestyle and being able to wake up and say, you know what, I want to go here now, or I want to go over here. And knowing that not only do you have the resources to live a good life and to take care of people and things that you feel are important to you, but being able to just do what you want when you want. And I think that for me, being able to wake up and say, next week I'm going to go to Ukraine and check that out. And I'm going to learn things I wanted to learn. And I'm going to be able to learn languages I wanted to learn. I'm going to be able to, learn history I want to learn. And whatever that is, it could be other things to other people, but being able to do that almost on demand, being able to do things that I imagined living in the United States were never possible, being able to meet people that I never thought possible, and really being able to open up. Like once the mind is open, you just start going out and realizing that anything is possible. I'm doing 12 dinners with different folks while I'm in Tbilisi, and you wouldn't imagine the people that I'm meeting just by reaching out and saying, here's what I'd like to offer you, and let's talk. And meeting phenomenal contacts. Just that ability to meet people, go places, control your schedule is one of the best things. For me, I don't like to sit in one place all the time. So the ability to always be going somewhere is important. And I'll tell you, I honestly think that I can spend my money better than the government. So following the legal system of not paying the taxes or nearly the taxes that I used to pay, it's allowed me to go and live a nicer lifestyle, have more of the luxuries, which in turn make me more productive. But it also has allowed me to give to a lot of charities, to do some charitable efforts on my own, because there's a feeling that when you keep all of your money rather than half of your money, you feel a lot more free, you feel a lot more successful, you feel like a lot more things can be done. And so on the financial side, with what we do at Nomad Capitalist, that has been very empowering to me and a lot of other people, because suddenly you have all your money to keep and you open up to helping other people and helping yourself a lot more.
This is episode 10 of the Ownstream podcast, featuring the Nomad Capitalist, Andrew Henderson.
All right, welcome to the Ownstream podcast. I'm Teresa Scoba.
And I'm Stephen Shelley.
And we're so happy to present this rich interview with Nomad Capitalist, Andrew Henderson. We first came across Andrew. We've been doing some research recently, thinking about where in the world we might want to move if we were going to actualize some of our dreams about owning land and some other things. And so we've been playing an exercise looking around the world, and we were both in our corners doing some research in various areas. And I think I was looking at how to get a second residency somewhere. That was one of the many criteria we were looking at, which we'll talk about another time. And I came across top 5 places to get a second residency or a second passport. And then this was Andrew's site, and wow, it is like a wealth of resources on living abroad, and specifically about financial freedom and how you can keep your hard-earned money around the world, and places to live that are really hospitable to doing that.
Yeah, also things like ease of mobility. For example, he was recently picked up by CNN. In fact, they published an article remarking about his list of the top passports to own in the world. And there's various criteria he assigns to that list, but one of them is of course, the ease of mobility. And I think if you have a Swedish passport, for example, it's far easier to get in and out of all kinds of places than, say, an American passport. I think a U.S. passport came in at like 33, 34 on the list. So anyway, Andrew is a guy who is a nomad himself. He has various bases around the world. I think right now he's in Tbilisi, Georgia, for example, and I think he has a home in Budapest and a few other places where he spends the bulk of his time. But he's traveling, and really his travels are him exploring the nature of living in a place, particularly from the standpoint of investing, opening a bank account, the financial aspects to our lives. He would be kind of the industry leader in uncovering the places, as he calls, where we're treated best. That's his one of his phrases, or one of his slogans, really, where he's looking at various aspects to our lives and which countries in the world, which places in the world where that is easiest. And so unsurprisingly, a lot of those are places that maybe 20, 30 years ago you wouldn't have wanted to go to and visit that are now really emerging markets, if you will, and where they are trying their best to make it very easy for people to come and live and set up shop, do business, invest, and engage with their culture that way. And so he finds himself in places like Georgia. I think he comments in the interview about Kazakhstan and other places that we haven't even thought of necessarily visiting, where he's out there exploring on our behalf. So if that's your interest, if you're interested, if you've ever thought about moving, or where in the world should I live, where is it easiest to invest, what other passport should I have, all those, that whole dimension to our world is where Andrew is the true expert.
And this idea that he has about go where you're treated best is really also just the idea that you can live anywhere in the world. And we've explored this some on a few of our podcasts today, but the idea that you don't have to have a narrow idea, you don't have to stay where you were born. And, sometimes we have a narrow sleeve of ideas of places we might move that we know, friends or family or this or that. And Andrew's job is really like exploring the entire world as a canvas for people to live, which is open to all of us. And I think he's trying to show people that way.
We will be back afterwards to wrap up. Until then, enjoy this great interview with Andrew Henderson.
All right. Well, Andrew, we're really thrilled to have you on the podcast. And we learned of you because we've been recently exploring places that we might live around the world. And we've been thinking for a few years of possibly leaving the U.S. and, talk about it a lot. And we started to take some action in terms of our research. And so anyway, I came across your website, I think, when we were looking at residency in other countries. But we recently launched Ownstream as a business to help people change their beliefs and lifestyles to create more freedom in their lives. We easily could have come across you that way as well, because I know that that's a huge part of your mission. So we'd love to, hear about your work at Nomad Capitalist, and we know that you founded the business to help people increase their freedom in their lives and improve their financial situations, think about diversifying their lives and how they might think outside the box about how they could live, go where they're treated best is what you think about. So can you tell us a little bit, just to get us kicked off, about your work and vision?
Yeah, well, I spent a lot of years running businesses in the United States. I had a large business in the media industry, and eventually got out of that and invested in some other smaller kind of unsexy businesses. And what I found was that I was traveling more and more outside the United States. I found that that's where I felt better. I saw more opportunities. It just was more comfortable for me, and traveled more and more. And I looked at the businesses and said, every year I'm going to the accountant and I'm paying 40, 42, 43% in tax, occasionally a little more, but right around that 43%. And I said, what would happen if I just had that 43% to invest? This is kind of unfair.
Right.
And then I started doing some stuff that involved the government and didn't get treated so well, and said, I'm paying these guys and they don't even treat me well, and I don't even really want to be here. And so I started to really figure out that there were ways to live overseas. There were ways to reduce what I had to pay. There were ways to keep more of my own money, reinvest more of that money, and build a freedom lifestyle that I felt comfortable with. And I think that's something a lot of people are looking at right now, guys, is how do I go where I'm treated best? How do I feel free? How do I, feel like I have a better sense of purpose, and I get to keep more of my own money. I'm not just giving half of what I'm making away to the government. That's really the vision, and it's something that for so many years has lurked in the shadows with nameless, faceless guys telling you how to skirt the law, has been the norm. And what I've been trying to do over the last 4 or 5 years now is to bring it out of the shadows and show people that there is a legal way to do these things. There is a legal way, and it is people's right to be happy and to be free and to keep more of their money. There is a legal way to do it. That's what my goal is, to show people that finally there's a way that they too can live the life that for years was only reserved to the international jet set.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of you personally, tracking back maybe into your, earlier years, I'm interested in kind of locating this thread of freedom and questioning things. Maybe you could kind of just describe growing up. I think aren't you from Cleveland? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm from Cleveland. And
so maybe you could talk about kind of growing up and being a student, or like early jobs, and maybe wherever you kind of first begin to catch on to the fact that there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye.
Well, I was fortunate enough, and I don't know that this is a prerequisite, but I was fortunate enough to grow up in a somewhat entrepreneurial family with a father who was in finance and ran a business, and was also the media. And so I kind of got the best of all those worlds. And I remember that, we did conferences 3 years in a row with Peter Schiff and Jim Rickards. And the third one, I said, enough of the big names. We don't need big names. I'm going to bring my father, and he's going to tell us how when I was 11 years old, he just kind of said out of nowhere, you should go where you're treated best when you're older. Don't think you have to stay in the United States. Mm. And so he was very much ahead of his time. I mean, many of the things that he said he said would come true, we're now seeing, including, what he predicted 20 years ago about this last election. And so I was fortunate to have that kind of forward-thinking environment to grow up in, where, my parents kind of saw the writing on the wall. They saw that when I was born in 1984, the United States was ranked the number one place to be born, and they saw that was changing. They saw that wealth was shifting back to the east and to a little bit to the south, and they saw that that's where the freedom was coming. And I think that they realized that no country lasts forever, and when countries start making certain decisions, they start to head in the wrong way, and they peak. And that's not me trying to be angry. It's not me trying to wish that. It's just an observation that historically has been very true. And so, I grew up in Cleveland, and I went to, the fairs in the summer as a kid. Did a lot of the things that people would do. Became an Eagle Scout. Did all those things that are the very American kind of things. But I also, on the other hand, probably wasn't the best student when it came to the later years. Great student in the early years, learned all the basics, but when it came to learning the stuff that we're not using now as adults, it became a little bit more difficult for me, and I really pushed back against that. And so, it shaped my view that there is an entirely different way of living, where the average person is not really in control of their life. The average person talks of their life like it's like they're being washed over like a tidal wave. Right. Everything from I got my girlfriend pregnant. No idea how that happened. To, I don't know. I don't have money. To, I don't know why. Why have I never traveled the world? Someday. The average person doesn't really take control of their life, and I wanted to take total control of my life, and I wanted to really be in the driver's seat. I didn't want to have a job. I didn't want to have to learn things I didn't want to know. I wanted to learn things that everyone told me I didn't need to know. And I wanted to be able to control my own destiny. And for me, I think, guys, that's where business really came in, because I saw business as the great equalizer, where if you're willing to work hard, no one can really stop you.
Yeah. Why don't you talk about some of your early businesses? I know there were, you've had a few ventures in the past different than the type of business Nomad Capitalist is. What were some of your first forays into the business world? Yeah,
when I was in a party school at Arizona State for a year, I barely attended because everything was in the morning, and I was up late plotting business ideas. But I did have time to convince a radio station, a local kind of smaller radio station, to let me come in from like midnight to 6 and produce some people's shows and start to build contacts. And I remember really taking that, basically as an opportunity to get in there and learn their sales strategy, so that a year later, I ended up working with them and starting helping radio stations like theirs all across the country selling inventory. And basically what it was you had all these failing AM radio stations that were on the brink of going under. not this one, but many others. And I came into these stations and I said, we can sell basically infomercials on your radio station, and you don't have to go under. You don't have to close your doors. And so basically we were a market maker for initially, pretty small companies, and later much larger companies like the Fortune 50 insurance company and some bigger, billion-dollar companies. And we put them on these radio stations all across the country. And so it was not certainly the most glamorous part of the media industry, but we grew that into different segments of the radio industry where we had different types of programming, worked with different people, and ultimately we're one of the biggest companies of its kind. That was kind of the main first two businesses. There were two different kind of angles to it by the time I got out of it, in two companies that later merged, and I sold that. What I later did, once that was on autopilot, once I was traveling the world, was start to invest in other businesses. And that ranged everything from the car business to helping someone start an insurance agency and taking a stake in that. And that went on to be pretty big, to one of the most intriguing stories, which was buying a guy's failing swimming pool business where he cleaned people's swimming pools. And we grew it into one of the largest companies in Arizona for cleaning swimming pools, and sold it 15 months later.
Wow, cool.
Like 3,000% ROI or something. I forget the numbers now, but I mean, it was a deal where I love the unsexy businesses because, and this is a lesson from China, actually. The Chinese, when I started going to China, before I started investing in these companies, I realized that a lot of the Chinese were making money in unsexy businesses. You'd see these, mega millionaires going around so unassuming. They had like $100 million from running a garbage business.
Right.
And so I said, all right, great. I'm gonna do that. I love the Chinese culture, and I'm gonna go and do that. I'll run a swimming pool cleaning business, and it was the most easy business to run, and we made such a fortune, just like basically sitting back and just letting it happen and applying like 3 basic management skills that no one else in the industry had. And we sold it for a lot more than we paid for it. It was kind of a fun 15 months or so building this up. I think that's really what I've seen from traveling the world is there are so many opportunities to build things up and become, very successful and very wealthy doing so. But most people, again, are still in that bubble of what's happening in my country. How do I improve my country? Do I vote for Trump? Do I vote for Clinton? What's going to solve the problem? There's a whole nother universe out there.
Mm-hmm.
And why do you think, you talked about how maybe it's because you grew up in an entrepreneurial family, but, by the time you were in the later school years, you were already kind of like, this is totally not useful to me, and there's another way. Like, why do you think that people are in such a bubble? Like, why can't they see that they have unlimited choices in their lives?
Well, that's a good question. I think that, people don't question much. And, I'm not a conspiratorial guy or a doom and gloom guy. Certainly, you could perhaps make a case that that's kind of how the system is set up. I mean, the system is set up to produce people who are loyal to the government because they need people to pay taxes. They're loyal to the workforce because we need people to work. And I think that whether by design or not, that's just how the system is set up. And quite frankly, I mean, maybe that's not the worst thing, because as much as people in my industry think that in 50 years everyone's going to be nomadic and no one's going to be paying tax, that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. I think for the average person, that's what is going to always be the case. And so I suppose, you need people to show up to offices and, do certain things every day. You can't have everybody being a web designer, but that doesn't mean that you can't be remote and you can't take control of your life. And so, why don't people see that? I mean, it's all the normal litany of reasons that people come up with to not move overseas or to not travel or to not invest overseas. And I think largely it's fear. I think we're afraid of the unknown. And I think especially in places like the United States, Australia, that are more insulated, where you're not mixing with other countries, where you're not going from Munich to Slovenia for the weekend and embracing those other cultures, because it's a lot harder to do so. I think that makes it doubly hard for those of us who grew up in the United States, for example, because where are people going from the United States? I mean, you can say that going from Arkansas to Seattle is the same thing, but it's really not. Going to Cancun is not really the impetus people need. So I think, again, the U.S. and Australia and Canada have this kind of distinct disadvantage where where do you get the influence, and who's going to teach you?
Exactly. And, one of the exciting things that's happened in the last 10 to 15 years is, we have the internet, and then if you do have a question, you can find that somebody has answered that question online. And, one of the spaces that you so eloquently fill is people looking to move abroad, people looking to explore their options, maybe to, exploring all kinds of things around dual citizenship, other passports, finding ways to reduce their tax burden and maybe in the process, surprise, surprise, improve the quality of their own lives. That's something that's really, really interesting to us. And, one thing that's a phrase that I've heard you say is safe havens. And I'm curious, as if you're looking at the globe now, like what are some of the current best safe havens or places that you feel are amenable to people moving there that might not be quite on our radar?
Well, I'll tell you, to preface this, I think that one of the reasons why I started really shifting what we do at Nomad Capitalist from just putting in information to actually working with a select number of people who really want to dive in and create a plan, a holistic plan. So I've learned two things. One, nothing is an island. Everything works with something else. So the bank account that you open in the banking safe haven needs to work with the passport safe haven or the tax safe haven. And so what works for one is not what works for everyone. Mm-hmm. There are some places that are definitely on the radar that work, at least in a vacuum. Maybe for you, maybe not. I think that one of the places that I look at that I'm a big fan of, and I've talked about this for a long time, is the Republic of Georgia. I think for banking and for just ease of operations and for efficient government, welcoming government, it's one of the best, if not the best. And I think that that is important. Everyone else has their metrics for what makes a country great and what makes a country have a lot of potential. Harry Dent, for example, best-selling author. I've interviewed him, and he's big on demographics. How old is the population? That kind of thing. I look at the culture of how to do business in a place, and maybe that's because I am the party school dropout, and I'm not using the sophisticated Ivy School, number manipulation. But I look at when I go there, what's the vibe? And you can't tell everything from that. But when you go to certain countries and they make everything impossible, when I go to Bosnia and they say there's 17 million steps to opening a bank account, even after the teller laughs and says, why would you want to bank here? That's what you don't need. You don't need a place that makes it impossible when in reality they should be making it easy. Georgia makes it very easy. I think that makes it a great safe haven. I think that for wealth, Singapore is still one of the number one places, not for living, not for doing a lot of things, but for storing wealth. If you have, objects to store in a vault, if you have cash to store in a bank account, although it's becoming more difficult. I think that Eastern Europe is one of the hidden gems for living, for hiring, for getting results, and possibly getting a passport. Nobody really talks about the Serbias or the Montenegros of the world, but I think that those are very underrated and they're becoming safe havens in their own right. So I look at this kind of Eastern Europe range as one of the great safe haven regions that no one's talking about. Estonia, for some people, a great place to set up a company. Again, very welcoming, very easy. Those may or may not be the safe havens for you. Some people like Hong Kong for the Hong Kong companies. But I really think that the safe havens are shifting from the West and into the East, whether that's Eastern Europe or whether that's East Asia. So for some people, it surprises some people. They say, hey, China, great place to bank for your particular situation. Again, not for everybody, but for some people, China can be a safe haven. But in general, I think that Eastern Europe is probably one of the untold success stories right now. Not so much in the Americas. I think Europe, the countries that have their head on straight, in Asia are where it's going to be at.
And what about like Central America, Costa Rica, places like that? We know a number of people who've moved down there recently, though probably not thinking along the lines that you do. But what are the drawbacks down there, you think?
Yeah, what I do, I like to call it the 4-hour work week 2.0. It's for those folks who who 8 years ago or 9 years ago, when the book came out, read the 4-Hour Work Week and said, wow, I'm going to go do this. And now they're crushing it and they're making a ton of money. And now they come to me and we help them go to the next level, which is, okay, you never thought you'd make $1 million a year, but you're paying 400 of it to the U.S. government when maybe you don't have to. So that's what I really do. And so in that realm, I'm not necessarily advising people on where to retire or where just to go live for fun, although obviously I'm not saying it should be miserable. It should be fun, right? We should have fun. But I think that when you factor everything in, Central America becomes less attractive for the people that I'm talking to, that want a bit more flexibility to travel. A lot of those countries, if you set up residence, you have to live there a substantial part of the year or else they cancel it. In terms of getting a passport, they actually have surprisingly good passports, but again, they're more difficult to get. Bureaucracy in that part of the world is relatively high. For example, Panama. They talk about how Panama, you can get a passport there in 5 years, and everybody on the blogosphere talks about how you don't even have to be there, except for the fact that I know a number of people who have lived there for 15 years, and they still haven't gotten the president to sign off on their passport. I can tell you, that doesn't happen in Georgia. It doesn't happen in Serbia. It doesn't even happen in Belgium, where I just did some deals, because in these countries in Europe, they say, oh, we have to get back to people. In Panama, hey man, what's 3 years, right? So I feel like I'm trying to avoid bureaucracy, and I feel like there's still a lot of that in that Central America region. It's also particularly, for some folks, it's unsafe. I mean, Nicaragua, I love Nicaragua. I've spoken very highly of Nicaragua. I think it's an investment. It's a good place. It's probably the best place in Central America because Costa Rica has kind of fizzled out, in my opinion. But, this does not affect my investment opinion. I was walking around Managua at like 6 o'clock on a Sunday night, and a guy put a gun in my face. So, not exactly the most safe place in the world if you look at the statistics. And so my concern is that Central America is such an easy place for Americans and Canadians to go that prices have been ramped up. Benefits have not been as good as people would expect. I think you have to be particularly careful how you're investing. I think bureaucracy was always high. It's perhaps even worse with all the people moving there. And for me, I don't think it's where you can go and be treated best. I think it's an easy choice for folks. And if it works for them, then that's cool. I'm not here to tell people what they should do. But from my perspective, trying to get all the puzzle pieces to match up, trying to find the best place, I think that whatever you can find in Central America, you can find something better and get more benefits somewhere else.
You mentioned the 4-hour work week, and one thing I wanted to ask you was, a lot of our audience are digital nomads. They're people who might hail originally from the United States or other Western countries, but now they're in Thailand, they're in Laos, they're in Vietnam, they're all over the world. What, in their case, what would you recommend as being, say, the best business structure for how to set up their company, and any other tips you might offer somebody who's location independent?
Well, I'll tell you what I've learned doing this for myself 9 or 10 years. And I think that what the difference in my perspective is that I'm actually doing this. I've gotten the passports. I've set up the companies. I've dealt with the bank accounts. And I've almost made myself kind of the guinea pig where occasionally, very rarely now, but occasionally, I have some bank account that decides to go and cause problems, and I get to see firsthand what that looks like. And I deal with the problems, and then I pass the word along so other people avoid it. I'll tell you one of the big problems that I've learned in doing this for myself and my own businesses is the idea of working forwards versus working backwards. What most people do is they go online and they say, okay, great, I need an offshore company. They don't know that for a fact, but somebody told them they need an offshore company.
Right.
So, okay, great, that just sticks. And then they go researching the cheapest, the easiest, the lowest tax offshore company. But they do so in a vacuum. And so they find like a Nevis company, for example. Hey, Nevis, I can't be sued, and zero tax, and all this different stuff. Well, that's great. No one tells you that nobody's opening bank accounts for Nevis companies right now. Nobody tells you that a lot of people don't want to deal with Nevis companies. Nobody tells you that your bank account that you set up in the developed world may not want to take money from your Nevis company to pay your salary. But hey, Nevis seems like the right thing to do. And so people get into a lot of problems that way. Oh, and then by the way, the lawyer in Nevis tells them, yeah, it's tax-free. And then they go back to the United States, go about their business, and don't realize that what happens in Nevis is 1% of their concern. What happens in the United States is 99% of their concern. So what I like to do is work backwards and figure out, where do I want to be? I want to pay as little tax as possible legally using the laws of my country. I want to potentially get a second passport if that company can help me do that. And I want easy banking, internet banking, easy to access from around the world. Okay, well, the person probably needs a little bit more sophisticated company where we can get tax exemptions and pay zero or very low. But it's going to be in a more developed country. Then we need to go open bank accounts, maybe not in that country, but somewhere nearby. And so I think that the process of where they should structure their company is kind of moving in that forward to backward direction rather than backward and then moving forward from there, where you're not actually working towards a solution. I think that it really depends on the business. Some people benefit from having two companies, one in the U.S. and one somewhere else. Some people will benefit from having one company. Some people need a more complicated structure. In general, my advice is the offshore tax havens are no longer the safe havens. They're under such scrutiny. Many of the banks in those places can no longer accept U.S. dollars. So if you're doing business in dollars, forget it. The banks are constantly having problems. Not all of them, but many of them. The companies just aren't that well respected. And you're seeing countries, including even Turkey, saying, yeah, we don't trust Belize companies. We don't even, we're just going to tax them. So I think that the days of the Seychelles and, Antigua and all that are coming to an end and are largely already at an end. The solution from there is figuring out which jurisdiction is best for your business that's onshore. Do you need one company? Do you need two companies? Which banks will take you based on, do you have $5,000 to deposit or $100,000 to deposit? I think that if it's something that you haven't done and you're looking to do it, I would do it sooner than later, because I think that in the next year or two, people with $5,000 or $10,000 to put in their business are going to be priced out. It's going to be a $50,000 to $100,000 minimum. I really think that that's going to become the case, because all the smaller banks that take companies with non-resident companies are just pricing people out. So we may be at the end in the next few years of the setup for the average person.
Taking a step back a bit to your, go where you're treated best. I know you started this work because you were seeking more freedom in your life. When someone approaches you, and I read something you recently wrote about all of the flurry of contact you got after the Trump election. When someone approaches you and, they have a variety of different interests or like different ideas of what freedom might mean to them, how do you help them approach that question of where they might be treated best? How does that look depending on the person that's reaching out to you, and how do you help them, arrive at a package that would mean freedom for them?
Well, speaking to what I mentioned earlier, my process that I found works for me, and I think helps others as well, is a diagnostic process. So here's what typically happens. And I've been there because, I've had to figure this stuff out myself over 9 or 10 years. And now it's like very easy to me, but, it wasn't always, right? Some of these guys like to act like they were born knowing about, Hong Kong tax law. I just figure it out. What you'll do is you'll call, okay, my friend said to get a Dubai company, and you'll call someone in Dubai. You'll Google, you'll start calling people. And within 5 seconds, they'll say, yep, sounds like you need the Ras Al Khaimah package, and we'll toss in a residency and 2 bank accounts, and you'll be very happy. It's $52,000, and, do you want to do it or not? Let's do it. And I'm like, okay, I'm all for moving quickly. In fact, my philosophy now is I say yes or no the minute the offer's presented. I don't go and talk to my husband or my wife or my anything. Like, now. Well, but just 5 minutes. No, now. I make a decision now. Well, how do I make a decision now when I'm being sold a strategy rather than a solution? How does Ras Al Khaimah residency? How does a Ras Al Khaimah bank account? How does that help me? I don't know. They don't know. But that's what they're in the business of selling. And if I say, well, hey, I heard Panama's good. What do we know? Ras Al Khaimah, number one, right? So the process that I like to go through is diagnostic, almost like going to the doctor, almost like going to a psychologist, where I like to dig in and say, hey, where are you trying to be? Explain the business. How does the business collect its money? Are you using merchant accounts? Are you using Stripe? Are you using PayPal? Where's your bank? Are you happy with the bank? What's the most important feature of the bank? What would you change in your bank? How does your company run? Where are your employees based? Are they on Upwork? Are they employees? Are they contractors? I mean, there's like hundreds of potential questions that I could ask someone to really figure out what's going on. And there may be one thing in their situation. Yeah, I got 2 guys working for me in the U.S. That may change what they need to do. That may change their plan. If somebody says, hey, I don't trust banks in the European Union, that may affect their plan. If somebody says, yeah, I want a second passport, but I want it to be, from a smaller country, they're not going to bother me. That affects their plan. Mm-hmm. So I think that what I do and what I like to have done with me when I go and work with other folks is I like to, I like to pay the best. I go and I find the best attorneys. I frequently overpay just because it's helping me to meet so many people and build my network. But on top of that, I think that someone who understands what I'm trying to do and who can diagnose where I want to be is important. And that's not what most people do. Most people just go out and they chase the latest shiny object, and businesses cater to that by selling the latest shiny object. And that's where people get into trouble, as I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of you personally, Andrew, I know that you have a few places that you frequent, quote unquote, bases. Why don't you talk a little bit about kind of how you've set up your life and how that works in terms of running your business? I think that's would be particularly of interest to the folks who listen to this podcast.
Yeah. We wrote an article a while back on Nomad Capitalist called 4 Ways to Live Like a Nomad. And I started with the first one way back in the day. I was the perpetual traveler, and it was because I wanted to explore Southeast Asia and Eastern Asia and Eastern Europe, one country at a time, 1 month at a time, so I could at least get enough material and meet enough people and kind of build some information there. And it was just dragging my bag from one hotel to the next. And what I do now is more on the other end of the scale. I'm not the total expat, but I do have what I call base cities. I have a base in Georgia, Tbilisi, Georgia. I have a summer base in Montenegro. Probably going to set up some kind of mini base in Belgrade, Serbia, because there's a lot of good opportunities there. And then in Asia, I'm based in Kuala Lumpur, which is a place that I've talked about as being the hidden gem for living in Asia and in Southeast Asia. I think it's one of the best places out there. And so I spend some of my time in those places, and then I travel from each of those places so that I keep a lot of my Asian banking, my Asian business, my Asian networking. I'm giving a speech in Asia this year, and I keep that more towards the winter months. So I'll go to Kuala Lumpur, I'll hang out there, and I'll go to China. I'll go to Bali for a weekend for fun. I'll also go to Myanmar for a week for business. And so I think that how I try and structure things is, rather than always bouncing back and forth all over the world and going crazy, I do that occasionally, but I try and structure it to where when I'm in Asia, that's my time in Asia. And maybe I'll go there twice in a year, but I try not to be always bouncing around. So having a base in Asia, having 2 bases in Europe, maybe even more. It's going to become a little bit tricky eventually. But when I'm in Europe, I'm doing things in Europe. And for me, I think that for somebody running a business, for someone who wants an efficient lifestyle, for someone who wants to live the nomad capitalist lifestyle, my philosophy is, with few exceptions, Dublin to Hong Kong. That's my range. And I'm keeping myself, for the most part, within that range because that's where I think most of this stuff can get done.
So what makes Kuala Lumpur the hidden gem, and what are you looking for when you're traveling?
I mean, it's partially the hidden gem just because it's a little bit contrarian. I mean, I think that there's a certain thing in the nomad industry, to call, if you can call it that, where everyone wants to be free and do their own thing, but there's still a lot of follow the leader. Like, maybe I just don't get it. I've never quite understood Thailand. Yeah. I just don't quite understand the great, amazing appeal. And I'm not saying it's a bad place, but I don't see how it's 100 times better than Malaysia. And again, Malaysia ticks the box of that welcoming place. When you look at a place that's welcoming, that leaves you alone, that just wants you to come, and they're happy with that, That's Malaysia. Thailand's been cracking down on visas. They're intent on kicking out every Westerner who's spending money in their economy. To make it so difficult now to get visas and renew visas and to stay there long term, to where everyone's just going and getting out a student visa or getting some kind of scammy work visa. To me, I say, why not go to the country that lets everyone in for 90 days? And quite frankly, if you leave for a couple of weeks and come back, they don't really care. I mean, I know people who've lived there for years, just as tourists. And quite frankly, I mean, I've had some people in Malaysian immigration tell me that we don't care if you do that, whether that's the official position or not. The people in immigration said, we want you to be here. We're happy to have you here. And so that's a great attitude. And I think it goes all throughout the culture. For me personally, it's developed. It's kind of the best of West and East. I've called Malaysia the United States of Asia for all the good reasons. You've got the diversity, you've got the different cultures, you've got the different foods, you've got all those things, but you've got such a laid-back country where they're not bothering you, they're not harassing you. You've got some of the best malls, you've got decent infrastructure, you've got connectivity to anywhere you want to go. And sure, Bangkok has that, Singapore has that to a certain extent. But I think that it offers, unless you're planning on drinking yourself into a coma every day with the higher liquor prices, I don't quite frankly see why it doesn't get the press that a Thailand does or an Ubud in Indonesia does. I don't quite frankly see it. So I think that I'm not saying it's amazingly better, although I personally prefer to Bangkok. I just think it doesn't get the respect it deserves.
And are there any countries out there that you are kind of looking at and plan to visit doing this kind of research? Any place that you may not have gone to before that is starting to pique your interest?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Europe is it's been pretty well covered. There are one or two countries in Europe that I have to go just to finish Europe, I guess, so to speak. And there are countries that I know I'm not going to find much. I don't think Belarus is really the answer, right, for example. But I'll tell you the two areas that I think are totally off the radar and that even I haven't spent that much time in. I started spending time in Africa more recently, and I want to do more exploration of the African frontiers because I think that you've got some countries there that are very promising. I look at Djibouti, I look at Botswana. I think those are potentially good countries. Even the Gambia, which was a mess. They actually had an offshore company regime there, but the country was a mess, and the president was there for a gazillion years, and it was just a big mess. They finally elected a new guy. The guy is finally in power. I think that that may be a country to watch and see what happens. So there are countries in Africa that I'm kind of watching and studying from afar and need to go there. The other area I think that I'm excited about having a base in Georgia to go there is the stands, Central Asia. Nobody talks about it. Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. Even I couldn't name too many things in those countries. And yet I think there is potential there, not in all of them, but in some of them. And that's probably the most unknown part of the world as far as I'm concerned when I talk to people. So Africa, I think, is the frontier. Obviously, people know that. There's countries that are better than others. By the way, Cape Town, great place to live if you don't need super fast internet, but not safe haven. I think there will be some safe havens in Africa. I think there might be some in the stands.
Being someone who obviously moves around a lot, do you have any sort of daily routines that keep you intact and grounded as you're moving from place to place?
I'll be honest. I think that that's an area where there's always room for improvement. What I have done, always being traveling, is I've had to set up a lot more policies, a lot more procedures. I've had to be a lot more firm, and it's been a great excuse for me to do what you don't have to travel to do these things. Some people just do them living in Chicago. But I've had to create my own waterfall for what do I do every day. And we're running some other smaller businesses here at Nomad Capitalist, businesses that the people we help are in the business of, such as online e-commerce. And so I have to say, okay, I'm only managing that on Wednesdays because otherwise I'd just be always thinking about it. So really siloing my calendar, saying here's when I work, here's the structure through which I answer emails, here's all of that. I think that that's been what I've done. I would not say that I've mastered the routine. the one area that I think probably deserves more working on is waking up early in the morning. I'm not really an early morning person, but I think that when I do that while traveling, that's the best. I'll throw out one other curveball that I have not tried, but I've heard from some people, and it could be a potential way for the traveler. Some people told me about polyphasic sleep, where they sleep, a little bit 4 times a day or 6 times a day, or they sleep, one big sleep at night, and then they take naps for the day. And people who have traveled say it's the perfect way to avoid jet lag, because you're just taking, a 30-minute nap every 6 hours or whatever it is. I don't exactly know, but they've said that really helps, because it's not like there's no bedtime. It's not like, 12 o'clock, but shoot, now I'm in Malaysia and that's 5 in the morning here.
Right.
It's just, hey, every 6 hours I take a nap. That seems like it could potentially backfire in someone, but I've heard people talk about it, and maybe that's an interesting thing for somebody to try.
And so I guess one question I would have for you, Andrew, is underneath all of this, your work trying to kind of explore freedom in such a very precise way. What do you think is underneath that for you? Are you someone who just doesn't want to be sort of controlled by outside forces, or what do you think is the motivation that you have to explore the world in the way that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain extent, if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, I mean, you've got to have a certain desire to do things differently. I mean, I remember my father was an entrepreneur, but also did stuff on radio, TV, hosted shows. And he said, being in the radio business, he says, all the really successful, entertaining guys have a screw loose. There's something that you have to, there's something like, in order to be a great performer on the TV or radio, you have to be a little nuts. And I think the same thing applies to entrepreneurs. I mean, to go out there and say, no, I'm not going to go and work 40 hours a week and spend half the time sitting around the water cooler and shopping on Etsy to make a salary. I'm going to go out for nothing guaranteed, work a lot longer, not get paid for sitting around the water cooler or shopping on Victoria's Secret, and actually have to, bring in the bacon myself. For me, it's normal. For everyone I work with and all the people that I'm friends with, it's normal. For you, it's normal. But, for the average person, it's kind of nuts. I mean, that's why people's parents say, no, go to Yale, go and get a job at a law firm, go and get a job with the government. And people all around the world say that. When I go to Montenegro, I'm on television every time, because they're like, we're so amazed by this digital nomad thing. You can just travel around. We tell everybody, go to work for the government. That's what's stable. Get your €500 salary and be done. Don't worry about it. And they're like, you're insane. So I think it's for me, it's not wanting to be told what to do, and that's a double-edged sword. Because, obviously with a lot of the stuff that I do, there's people telling you, what you have to do. I mean, when you fly in the airline has policies, and you got to follow the policies. So obviously, I mean, people are always going to tell you what to do, but I at least wanted to control how I make my money, and how I control my freedom. And I'll tell you this, growing up as kind of a smart alecky kid, I think a good kid, but a smart alecky kid, I thought to myself, I'm not good at, kissing up to people. I'm not going to be the one that they promote. They'll probably find someone who's nicer and more, of a suck up. And, I may be better at the job, but I don't have the confidence that I'm the politician that can go into a workplace and be promoted. And I always felt kind of like I was responsible for myself for that reason.
Yeah. And I'm sure you get those questions from people who just can't even imagine how you do it. I'm curious about, one other question. Then we have some questions that we always end the podcast with. But, for somebody who's wondering kind of what it's like to live a life like this, I guess, what would you say are some of the, the best, the best parts of living your life as flexibly and as freely as you do in the way that you do?
I think being in total control of your own lifestyle and being able to wake up and say, you know what, I want to go here now, or I want to go over here. And knowing that not only do you have the resources to live a good life and to take care of people and things that you feel are important to you, but being able to just do what you want when you want. And I think that for me, being able to wake up and say, next week I'm going to go to Ukraine and check that out. And I'm going to learn things I wanted to learn. And I'm going to be able to learn languages I wanted to learn. I'm going to be able to, learn history I want to learn. And whatever that is, it could be other things to other people. But being able to do that almost on demand, being able to do things that I imagined living in the United States were never possible, being able to meet people that I never thought possible, and really being able to open up. Like once the mind is open, you just start going out and realizing that anything is possible. I'm doing 12 dinners with different folks while I'm in Tbilisi, and you wouldn't imagine the people that I'm meeting just by reaching out and saying, here's what I'd like to offer you, and let's talk, and meeting phenomenal contacts. So I think that's just that ability to meet people, go places, control your schedule is one of the best things. For me, I don't like to sit in one place all the time. So the ability to always be going somewhere is important. And I'll tell you, I honestly think that I can spend my money better than the government. So following the legal system of not paying the taxes or nearly the taxes that I used to pay, it's allowed me to go and live a nicer lifestyle, have more of the luxuries, which in turn make me more productive. But it also has allowed me to give to a lot of charities, to do some charitable efforts on my own, because there's a feeling that when you keep all of your money rather than half of your money, you feel a lot more free. You feel a lot more successful. You feel like a lot more things can be done. And so on the financial side, with what we do at Nomad Capitalist, that has been very empowering to me and a lot of other people, because suddenly you have all your money to keep and you open up to helping other people and helping yourself a lot more.
That's pretty great. Well, Andrew, we should wrap up here. We have 3 quick questions we ask every guest just to provide a little consistency to our episodes, and then we'll ask you at the end kind of what's coming up for you and how people should follow up with you should they be interested. But our first question along these lines is, what book or books, and let's sort of keep it to 3, do you think every person should read?
There's so many good personal development books. The One Thing, it's a good book on focusing on one thing. Mm-hmm. The Achievement Habit I read recently, I like that book a lot. There's a chapter in there that I'll do a spoiler on, which is called Reasons Are BS. And I think that when with everything that we do, I mean, people have a reason. I met a girl that I knew in high school recently, and her now husband, and they've lived in Dublin. They moved from Ohio to then Dublin to then Sydney to now Singapore. And they said in 5.5 years of living overseas, guess how many of our friends have visited us? 0. Everyone. These are not people. These are friends who are. I mean, these are successful people, right? And these are not people who are like, they're not working at the Singapore McDonald's, and nor are their friends. Right. Their friends can afford to. They're very successful people, but everyone, you would believe it. I have people who worked for me. They meet people all around the world. Oh, how do I do what you do? You go and you buy a plane ticket. And really, it's like, oh, the magic. Okay. And they never do it.
Yeah.
0 people. So reasons are BS. And listen, even I, having already done many of these things that people have a reason not to do, I mean, I still run into that. Reasons are BS. One other book that I recommend more on the economic side, that really kind of opens your mind is the $10 Trillion Prize. This is a bit of a heavier read, but it talks about the $10 trillion in spending that's kind of come out of China and India. And China and India are not the only places, of course, and for the average person starting a business may not be the best places to go and be, or even to go and live. But it tells you how the differences in those cultures, how different cultures act and operate differently, but also how the world is changing. And so I think that opening up to how other cultures think is an important lesson. That was a good first book. If I may just toss in one more just for kind of fun, is The Geography of Bliss, Where the World's Happiest People. Not necessarily an educational experience, but a fun book to read if you want to learn about why certain cultures are happy and why others aren't.
Definitely.
Cool.
The second question is, what is the best meal you've ever had and why?
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. That's one of the things that I guess you could add to the list of being a nomad.
Yep.
I couldn't could I nail down one meal? I could not nail down one meal. I mean, I hate to say that in the last year or two, it's probably been the Capitol Grill in Mexico City. I hate to make a chain that on one meal, but it was so spectacular. That may be up there. I'm not the biggest foodie, but I would almost say, what are the best cities that I've had food in? Like the best food weekend.
Sure.
That might be difficult. But for the best meal, I mean, I guess I'll have to go with the chain because that's the first thing that comes to mind. But so many great meals around the world.
What's the best city? What's the best city?
That?
What's the best city?
It might be Istanbul.
Istanbul.
Ah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, last question. And this ought to be a particularly interesting one for you. What have you learned in the last 30 days that you think every person should know? And if this is related, if you want to relate it, say, to things happening, in the U.S., given our folks are typically U.S., that's fine. But if something else comes to mind, great.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think something I've learned in the last 30 days that, it is maybe I've known before, but now I've adapted it, is really an emphasis on the fact that, you're not in control. And I've been doing some personal development reading lately, and it's really been hammered home that as much as we want to be in control, there are certain things that we can't control. And I think that how that applies to the United States right now is people, again, are freaking out. Trump's in there. What's Trump going to do? Some people are happy. Some people aren't happy. You're not going to change that. But owing to some of the personal development stuff that I've read, i.e., I'm rereading The Achievement Habit, you have the ability to create your own destiny. And so I think that it's really been interesting to see people in the United States in the last 30 or 45 days acting as if they have no other options. And acting as if they're stuck in that system. Trump is not the king. You can go where you're treated best. And I think that really adapting that to this current environment has been interesting because, everyone still is talking about the same things. Something I've learned in the last 30 days, maybe 60, but okay, very close. Mexico has one of the most underrated passports in the world. Yet that's important when we're talking about this whole thing that's happening in the United States. Because what does everyone talk about? When we had 10 times or 20 times the traffic on the election night, and I'm sitting in Cape Town watching Trump get elected, and I'm seeing the traffic go out of control. Everyone's talking, how do I move to Canada? No one's talking about how do I move to Mexico. Yet on my scale of which country is far more welcoming to the average person who doesn't have a highly sophisticated job or doesn't have $1 million to invest, it's Mexico. And yet Mexico, in the last 60 days, I have learned that now Mexicans can go to every country in the world, with the exception of some small countries you never go to, and the United States. Their passport, which I'm helping one of my employees get right now for having a Mexican husband, a Mexican son, their passport is almost on par with the United States. And if the United States loses visa-free travel to Europe, like Europe is threatening, it'll be far better. So isn't it interesting how everyone's talking about Trump and no one knows the escape route. Everyone just wants to stay and fight. That's the old thing I always say, don't do, stay and fight. And yet the people who are talking and pretending to leave and then making reasons for not doing it are saying they're going to go to a place that doesn't want them, doesn't welcome them, and that they can't legally go to, while they ignore the place that's almost quite as good, quite frankly. If I had to choose Canada or Mexico, there's no decision. I'm going to Mexico. So much more warm. I mean, no one's in Canada. It's like summer for 3 weeks there. Mexico is one of the hidden gems. Not, it's bureaucratic to a certain extent. But if you can get in there, why is nobody talking about going to Mexico? And again, it's that thing where we're just trained. Canada, that's the place. Susan Sarandon threatened to go there, and Bush won in 2000. Okay, fine. That's the place we go. Canada. We go to Canada. Why?
Yeah, everybody's focused on the wall. They're not focused on maybe scooting across the border before the wall gets up.
It's a bit of a metaphor too, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Ron Paul said that was it 2012, 2008, walls keep people in. I'm not here to be that conspiratorial.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, I mean, I hope that, if there's a wall, it doesn't keep, people from going to Mexico. I mean, because I think Mexico is one of the underrated places, at least for living, maybe for getting a passport. I don't know. I mean, but Mexico is really coming into its own. It's becoming a fantastic, I don't think it always has been a fantastic place, but they're really becoming respected on the global stage now in a big way.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, Andrew, as we close, why don't you share with us anything coming up for you, things that our audience should know, and certainly where we can find you online.
I think one of the things I've learned being a traveler is not to have too many things coming up. I'm trying to do keep doing the same things. I used to have conferences, and I'm speaking here and I'm speaking there, and I said, why? Me hosting conferences with Peter Schiff doesn't force people to take action. So nomadcapitalist.com. I mean, we do a podcast, we do YouTube, we do blogs, and that's where I'm at. And I try to just do the same thing try to expand my knowledge, try to share that with other folks, whether it's on the blog or on the YouTube channel or just people that I'm working with one-on-one, 5 folks a month. So I think that it's been a phase shift for me to not always be doing new and crazy things, but to just do the same things that work consistently. And if people like that, then maybe I can help out.
That's great.
Very cool.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks. This has been such a fantastic conversation. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
My pleasure to be with you, as always.
All right. That's it for this week's Ownstream podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this really insightful conversation with Andrew Henderson. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode for links to everything mentioned, including Andrew's site, The Nomad Capitalist, all the books he mentioned, some recent media on Andrew, and his social media profiles. All of that can be found at ownstream.co/Nomad Capitalist. That's ownstream.co/Nomad Capitalist.
Also, before we let you go, please sign up for our weekly tip-off email at ownstream.co and just click the sign up button in the upper right-hand corner. This is where we share each Monday 3 cool things we've learned in the last week in the areas of lifestyle, business, and spirit. This could be an amazing quote, individual, tip, or tool designed to bring you more freedom and power in your life. So definitely sign up for that again at ownstream.co and just click sign up.
Finally, follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and on Instagram where we post regularly at own_stream. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening to the Ownstream podcast. To learn more and connect with us, please visit ownstream.co or follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and Instagram at own_stream.